There you go, Mark.
So
It's all you.
Pam, how many claws on a bear?
Funny.
Trick question.
I do like that pose of that bear with that one claw up. You can see the Freddy Krueger claw.
It's
But really, I don't know the answer to that, Pam. What is it?
I don't know the answer to it either.
Oh, I just counted 5.
Yeah.
That's standard, Mark?
That's pretty standard. Yeah.
Yeah.
When
I don't
you
know. I
step
don't
in
think
them,
they have 4, but then do they have a thumb claw?
it's pretty much forward though.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing them when I step in them. In some places, you don't really see the claw marks, but just like pads. You're walking through the forest and you literally walk from one step to the next. Pretty Alaskan, those moments, those memories.
Yeah, I
I
love
love it.
seeing that in their prints in the sand.
Yeah.
Footprints
some of
in
them
the sand.
are bigger than others.
Mhm.
We're giving everybody a minute or two here before we start. But if you're joining along, hello, everybody. We'll start this off shortly. Good to see that some of you had some time to join us.
Feel free
And
to jump in the chat and tell us where you're all from. Pretty sure the chat's working.
Leave some nice notes there for Richard and Jess, and Pam, and me.
Is this the part where I sing Footprints in the Sand?
We're going to save that till just a little bit later, Richard, but I promise it's coming.
I just want to belt it out.
This is not American Idol
You
Wait,
definitely don't
what?
want me to sing.
or The Voice.
I'm here for the wrong webinar. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll start that next, though, in 30 minutes, I promise. So, all right, cool. Well, everybody, we're excited to start talking shop. So I've been photographing the landscape for quite some time, and it wasn't until I'd say 15 years ago that I noticed that all these images were floating by or walking by, depending on where I was. And I realized that I was more fascinated in wildlife photography than I ever thought possible. So I'm excited today to talk a little bit about wildlife photography. And I guess it's just kind of there's a magical moment when you're spending time with the wildlife and you're trying to line up the shot and you're watching the light, not knowing exactly what's going to happen. But, it's amazing how it often just does. And so today you're going to have to deal with me, Marc Muench, because Luke Dre is out scouting in some pretty cool place. I don't even know exactly where he is, but he's looking for new locations for us. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the wildlife in North America. And when you're considering photographing wildlife, it's not the first thing that comes to mind. Sometimes it's like an African safari, right? You've got lions and all these amazing creatures out there, or a leopard in the Pantanal, or somewhere exotic. But what we have here in North America is pretty amazing. And we've actually spent quite a few years creating workshops where you have great opportunities to photograph wildlife in North America. And so today we're going to talk to Richard Bernabe. Hey, Richard.
Hey, everybody.
And Pam Dorner. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
And we're going to be talking about the opportunities that you would have in some of these very cool places. And so as we go along, we'd love to hear from you. As Jess mentioned, if you have any questions about the workshops or the locations or anything that they're talking about, please just write it up in the chat below. And as you're looking there, don't forget, I kind of want to start a little poll for everybody. And this is if you've been on a workshop with us, it'd be great if you clicked yes and then told us what you liked about the experience. Maybe it was the leaders, maybe it was the bears, maybe it was the subject matter, whatever it was, we'd love to hear from you. If you haven't been on a workshop with us, that's okay. Just click no and let us know maybe where you'd like to go. All right? Because we'd love to hear what places you want to see. So I'm going to just dive in here and I want to take a moment to introduce Richard because Richard's been photographing the world way before he joined the Muench Workshops team. which has now been many years. And I know from being with him that he's not only a great photographer, but he's a great instructor. And so today we're excited to have him along to tell us some more exciting, interesting things about his wildlife photography. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Wow. Well, thank you for the very kind introduction, Mark. Yes, my name is Richard Bernabe, and I am a wildlife and travel photographer for almost 22 years. And I've been with Muench Workshops for 6 or 7. And Mark sends me to the coolest places in the world. I mean, what else can I say? I live in South Carolina, and I do prefer wildlife photography over any other genre. I do like being in the presence of these animals, particularly the ones we're going to talk about today. I've been to Alaska at least 30 times to photograph bears, and of course Yellowstone would be another place where when you think of Yellowstone, you think probably wildlife before landscapes. But yeah, looking forward to talking about these subjects with you all tonight and answering any questions. And thanks for the introduction again, Mark.
You're more than welcome, Richard. And thank you again for being here. And next, I want to say a couple words about our other guest, Pam Dorner. You have started out as a guest on our workshops. And then after, I forget exactly where it was, but I was looking at some of your images. I know it was on the back of your camera at one point. And then you sent me an email of a collection of images, and it just about jumped out of my chair at how beautiful they were. And so after we realized this, we asked her to help teach our Bosque del Apache photography workshop down in New Mexico. And so now Pam Dorner has started teaching some workshops with us, and we are thrilled to have her. So hi, Pam, again.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much. It's
Well,
great to be here.
thank you for joining us. We've got some questions for you today. I think you'll like them, but we're just super excited that you're here. And just really quickly, you both photograph with Canon, is that right?
Yes.
That is true.
Oh,
Yes.
gosh. I guess my Nikon, I don't know what I'll do with it, but anyways, I'll keep it for now.
You're evolving. It's okay. You'll be there one day.
I'll get there someday. So, Richard, I know there's a lot that goes into your pictures, and oftentimes there's layers of things that go into them. And I want to ask you a little bit about how you look at this image and how you tell us about the composition, specifically in this shot.
Okay. So first, let me give the setting here, because whenever I show this photograph, everybody assumes that it's Yellowstone, but this is not Yellowstone. This is wood bison in the Yukon, and the little preserve that we used to go to. I don't think we go there anymore, but yeah, these are wood bison, and the reason why I chose this composition is because if anybody's listened to anything where I'm talking about composition, I'm talking about diagonal lines. So even though there aren't any like literal lines in this photo, there are two very strong virtual lines, virtual diagonal lines. So actually the centerpiece of this is right dead in the center. It's that big wood bison with the frosty face and the big head and the bulging eyes. That's like the most conspicuous part of the photograph. But then you have these two diagonal lines, virtual diagonal lines, coming in from the upper corners inward, kind of just pointing in, and it creates this little V shape that, if
Like
again, it's not literal, but it is kind of abstract or virtual lines. So it would work either way. Even if it was inverted, it would still work. But it's the diagonal lines that make this. It's the V shape, and then all the attention being drawn toward the center, where this big, beautiful, frosty, ugly, big face is with the big hump. That's where you're. That's like the focal point. But it's those lines that kind of pull you into the center.
It's hard to see those lines. I know it's it's a second, third read. And from what I understand about your compositional method is it's a second, third read that you have to see in your eye or see through the lens, which isn't always obvious. That takes some time to get used to.
I try to talk about like seeing abstractly, is that what you see like literally in front of you, sometimes you need to see beyond that. You can call the second read or third read, but instead of just seeing a group of bison coming towards you, I'm looking for shapes and lines and patterns in space. And I've just taught myself and conditioned myself to see that way over years and years and years. So I mean, I enjoy the literal parts of nature, and that's one of the reasons why I like wildlife and nature and all the places that we go to, because they're literally so beautiful. But when it comes time to when I get behind the camera, I kind of let go of the literal, and I try to see more abstractly. I look for shapes and lines and patterns in space, all those things we talk about. And as you're walking toward us, it was just obvious to me that it's almost like a triangle or a V shape. And that's why this one made the cut and the other 30 or 40 images that I made while they're walking toward us didn't.
Yeah, because you could crop, I don't know, a quarter
Well,
of the file off of both sides and set them, line them up perfectly in the center as a vertical, and it would still be a compelling image.
yeah. So this is already cropped some. I think it's for the format of this webinar, but you
Sure.
can see it's like 2-to-1 almost, but there's a little more space at the top and bottom. But you're right, it could be that cropped that way too.
That's what I love. That's why I was saying earlier, there's different layers to these images. And so once you add all those things up, you come up with a really compelling composition.
So the composition's cool, but but it's also the atmospheric. It's like the breath. You can see it's kind of misty from
Oh,
the
yeah.
breath. And so it's one of those times where it came together.
And Barney
speaking of that-
commented and he said the white
Oh.
on the right balances the dark on the left. For sure.
And also one more little point for those wondering, that when you're confronted with this situation, and you're shooting with a telephoto lens, you're not going to get the whole scene in focus. You're not going to get all the bison in focus. So when in question, you have a situation like this, focus on the closest one. So you can see that the one in the center, the big, ugly, frosty one, is in tack sharp, and then the others behind it are out of focus, but that works. If it was another way where I focused on, say, the second one from the left, and the big one in the middle was not in focus, it would have been thrown away.
Sure. Makes good sense. Do you remember your focal length and aperture by any chance?
I do not.
I'm
Sorry,
sure
but
it was not wide open at like 2.8 or something.
No. It's probably around f8, but still, you know what? It's almost like you don't want to stop down too much, because first of all, you start getting diffraction. But also, if it looks like it's close, like look at that bison, the second one from the left. So it's out of focus, but if I got it like it was close to being focused, then it would look troubling. So it's almost like you want them out of focus, and you want to be sure it's purposefully out of focus. So if I stop down to 16 or 18, it wouldn't be nearly as much resolution for one, but then it starts to look like it was close, but maybe a mistake. I want to make sure that the one in the center is purposely focused and the others are purposely out of focus.
We have one quick question asking how far away were you and what length lens? Do you remember?
I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that they were 40 feet, and that was about maybe 300 millimeters. Just a wild guess.
Thank you.
They are big bison.
They're big.
I remember
These are
seeing
bigger
them
than the
there.
plains bison. Yeah.
They big, beautiful humps. It's a great shot. Speaking of great shots, this one just wow. And it's like, I think I have a clue of what you did here, but you got to take it away and tell me what made this image so good looking.
Okay, so this was taken in Southwest Alaska, probably Katmai. And if you go to one of these places, like we go to Geographic Harbor, and you sit down and you're surrounded by bears. I mean, they're all over the place and they're catching salmon. This one looks really warm for some reason from what I'm seeing here. But anyway, so they're just surrounded by salmon and they're chasing salmon, and there's so much going on. There's so much activity. And like the first day or two, you're taking your normal shots. You're trying to freeze the action. You're trying to catch them catching, they're running, they're jumping through the water, they're catching the salmon, get the salmon in their mouth, all this kind of stuff. So by the third or fourth day, you feel like you've got those shots. You want to try something a little bit more expressive, a little bit more creative, a little more. So then I start like working with, slower exposures. And so you get them running and you're panning and doing all that kind of stuff with like 1/10 of a second, 15th of a second, 20th of a second. Well, this one, you know, most of those don't work out, but this one here, he had just caught a salmon, and the way he was turning, it almost looks like there's a rotation going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say there's probably like a 20th of a second. And later, I just kind of didn't really pay attention to it at the time because you're kind of in the middle of all this action going on. But later, when I looked at the photos, I noticed that there is that illusion of motion. You know, you can't capture that fourth dimension in a photograph, but you can create the illusion of motion. And so that paw in the front, that movement there, very dynamic. There's there's like this almost like a spinning motion, but the eye is tack sharp in the middle. So I'd like to take like some of the credit for maybe doing like 1/5 of it right, but the other 4/5 is luck. So that's really what's going on. It kind of happened, and he kind of like moved his front paw through the image, and I just had the right shutter speed, and I had it focused right so that as he was rotating, his eye was pretty stable.
Yeah, that's the part that I saw right away. And I honestly thought maybe you had rotated the camera. You were, playing around with that. But it's interesting to hear that the bear was actually rotating. And then
Yeah,
of
he's kind of
course,
spinning his torso a little bit in that front paw. Yeah.
no, it works. And like you say, I want to go back to that statement you made about the illusion of movement. That's it's one of those ethereal elements of photography that is difficult to create. And I mean, we have tricks for it once in a while, but anyways, in this scenario, it worked very well.
Thank you.
So Pam, I want to ask you a little question about your photography, especially in regards to anticipating what animals do and anticipating wildlife in general. Can you share with us a little bit about how you predict animal movement?
Well, it takes a firm understanding of the wildlife you're shooting. And I didn't really understand this until, um, when I first started doing wildlife photography, I Googled, what does it take to be a good wildlife photographer?
And it
And
came up
also,
Richard Bernabe.
yeah,
Whoa.
exactly. And so um, everything I looked at said to know your subject. But I thought about this in very generic terms, like know where do they live? What do they eat?
Mm-hmm.
Are they nocturnal? I didn't think about it specifically, like a specific subject. And until COVID came around, and I shot a lot along the river. We were kind of tapped down, couldn't travel, and I was getting antsy. And about that time, I saw a story about a mama bear in the Tetons having quads for cubs. And as we know now, bear 399. But I didn't know a lot about her. But I think I was packed and in the car the next day as soon as I heard the story. Anybody that knows me knows how much I love bears. And so when I heard, 4 bear cubs, I was gone. But I left so quickly, I really didn't have a good plan for finding her. I was just gonna, look for a bear jam. That was my master plan. And so I got there the first morning, and I'm driving around, driving, not finding anything. And then all of a sudden I see, big group of cars and people. And I got really excited. It took me forever to park, but I parked, and I was walking towards the people, and there were 2 guys with big lenses coming towards me. And I'm like, is this Bear 399? Is she here? And they said, oh, she was here, but you just missed her. It was an amazing morning. Being photographers, they just show me all their pictures. And while I was happy for them, it was just like, if I just would have done this, if I would have gotten here earlier, if I would have gone a different route. And thankfully, I didn't leave. And I ended up meeting this couple that had followed Bear 399 for over 10 years.
Hmm.
And I spent the week with them learning all about her and her habits, her patterns. And I was just amazed at just how much they actually knew. I mean, might have been longer than 10 years, but it was a long time. And so the whole week, I spent shooting with them, learning this, kind of anticipatory type of approach to photography. At the end of the week, they had to leave. And so, but I ran into two friends of mine that I'd photographed bears with in Alaska. And we photographed Bear 399 on the river and coming down these power lines. And I realized she had actually come up to nurse. It was really an amazing day. And I realized she was really near this parking area this couple had told me about that it was, if you drove by, you wouldn't even noticed it. It was just kind of hidden. But I remember them telling me some stories about having amazing encounters with her in that parking area, which I thought was strange when I heard it at the time. But I told my friends, I really think she's headed in there. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to wait for her. And I remember one of them saying, but Pam, we've got eyes on her. She could come towards us. She could go the other way. And I just, I said, from what I know about her, I really think she's headed that way. So I walk in there and there's a small group of people getting set up to shoot. And I realized these are people that have followed her for years as well. I knew I was in the right place. There was a guy getting set up on a truck and I told him I can envision her coming over that hill. It wasn't my knowledge of her, it was this couple's knowledge, but it was, still knowledge I had. And so I was talking to some people and then all of a sudden somebody said, here she comes. And it was just an amazing moment to have this matriarch of the Tetons walking right towards you. And, there weren't many people there. And I don't know if, Richard probably has, but if you've ever been in a bear jam in the Tetons, it's crazy. There's people everywhere. There's cars everywhere. There's usually someone yelling. I don't know why, but rangers are usually moving people all around. And so this was totally different than that. It was quiet. It was peaceful. One of the little bear cubs jumped up on a log and was playing. And yeah, in that picture. And it was a magical moment. And it was really a defining moment for me. I said, this is the way I want to do photography. I want to be ahead of the game. I don't want to be, in the thousands, along the road. I want to be ahead of the situation. And so that's, to me, it's just the knowledge of, of um, the wildlife you're shooting and being able to kind of envision a shot. I think when you have that knowledge, you can envision, a moment and you put yourself in that moment and you have more control of the situation. So you have better control of the light and anyway, that's.
And this image of this young cub running with his ears back or her ears back reminds me of my dog in Izumi, like just
Yeah.
running, having a great time. What a
Yeah.
beautiful shot. And
Love a shot, Pam.
Thank you. Yeah,
Pam, was this shot on a tripod or was this handheld?
this was on a tripod. Yeah, there was just a lot of happiness. And that was the one thing. Yeah, I did text my friends and I told them that she was in there. One of them made it and one of them didn't. I mean, you've got big gear, you've got tripods, you're trying to, get to, different spots. And it's really hard um, to navigate. And so I would never have been able to get in here if I had just waited. And the one friend that did make it, he got one of the most amazing pictures I've seen of her with two cubs on each side, just beautiful. So
kind of like this one.
well, he got a better one, unfortunately. He was on a better side of the parking lot than I was. But anyway, photography for me is so much about moments and just being in the moment. And that was an incredible one for me. There's a documentary about that I think is out this week on the Nature Channel about Bear 399 in the Tetons. And it's mainly about Tom Mangelson's experience, but it's really interesting. It gives you an idea of what it's like to be there.
When did you take that picture, Pam?
That was the start of COVID. I think it was that 2020?
Yeah.
So it's been a while.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think she gave had the quadruplets in 2020, so that may have been 2021.
They were, I think she had just come out with them, so I'm pretty sure it
Yeah,
was
okay, then
2020.
2020, yeah,
But I did photograph them the next year as well.
very
So
nice.
I had this question for you, Pam, but you know, you brilliantly just explained a situation that I'm going to ask you about. But it's basically, um, when is a moment when you think your persistence and patience really paid off in a way, maybe that you expected, but maybe in a way that you didn't expect it?
So a couple years ago, I heard about a great horned owl family near my home that had two owlets, and the nest was super high. I went down to check it out. It wasn't very interesting images, but I started noticing the relationship between the mother owl and the father owl, and I was fascinated by it. And so I would go down in the morning. I would just find out where they were roosting. I would leave them alone during the day. So, it's very important that owls get their sleep during the day because they hunt at night. And then I would go back at night when they were more active and just kind of watch the behavior. And I um I just I kept watching them, the relationship with the mother and father. And then when the young owls got off the nest, I noticed, these patterns and these habits. And I realized you can anticipate bird behavior as well. And I started wondering, well, can I anticipate shots with the owls? And I started going down like every day. I would never miss a day. It didn't matter, birthdays, dinners, everything revolved around I wanted to be there for the owls and find out about them. And so I noticed the young owls really started to mimic what the mother owl would do. And
Mm.
there was an old snag that she loved to land on before she would hunt in the evening. And I thought, well, there was one morning where they roosted near the snag, and I thought, tonight's going to be the night that, I was really hoping for one of them, just one of them would land on the snag. And so I told myself I was going to set up by this and just wait for them and anticipate, hope that one would come land on this old cottonwood tree. And I got there that night in typical New Mexico. The skies exploded all around. It was a monsoon night. There was just beautiful color. And the landscape side of my brain is like, you need to go to the river and find a comp and shoot. But the wildlife side of my brain is like, nope, stay the course. This is going to happen. And it really took a lot of patience. But right as the light was starting to fade, not one, but both of the young owls came and flew towards me on this snag. I was exactly where I wanted to be. And it didn't last that long. You can see the middle picture. The mother owl found a bug and called them off. And so one of them went over and got a bug. But if I would have been near the roost tree, I never would have gotten the shot. And so it took a lot of knowledge of them, but I learned a lot as well. So
I don't know if you guys realized, but the two are holding hands here in this shot. Isn't that amazing? Right? It's just,
there's
it seems
so
that
many,
way, and I'm not exactly sure what they're doing, if they truly are intentionally doing that, but it sure looks that way.
there were so many sweet moments. I really learned a lot by watching this little owl family. It's incredible.
You are
So
definitely the animal whisperer, for sure.
tell us a little bit about, in addition to whispering to the wildlife, um, tell us a little bit about your typical things, like your typical camera settings, that you probably the ones that you rely on the most,
Well,
especially in conditions that change fast, when things are
it
happening fast and the light's changing, maybe.
It might surprise people, but I love auto ISO. And especially with birds, this is a northern harrier. It's one of my favorite birds to shoot, and they can be erratic. They're flying over fields, they'll see something, they'll dive, they can fly all around you. And so by using auto ISO, I don't you don't have time to change your settings. And so I like to, set it and forget it. And so I'll set it, a fast shutter speed, wide open, auto ISO, and then I'm good to go. And so this is just the way I like to shoot.
Can you share with us a little bit about what you feel your creative wildlife photography is, or if there's a particular type of light or um, anything that you feel is your kind of personal extra touch that makes your wildlife photography more creative?
Well, it was interesting because, not that long ago, I saw an ad for a bird photographer on Facebook, and it was like he had all these courses, but he had this free little podcast, and I thought I'm going to listen to it. I can always learn from other people, and he was going through all these different things. He went to exposure, and he said, always, always, always keep the sun behind you when you're shooting birds. Never, shoot them any other way. And I'm sitting there listening to him, and I hear this and I'm waiting for him to say except, or unless you're going to do it creative, kind of image. And so I'm listening to this and I'm like, no, because I love to shoot birds with the sun behind them. I love backlighting, and that to me, that's how I shoot creatively. Um, this particular image, this was a sandhill crane at sunrise. The sun's behind. I spent about whole spring, going down every day to a particular spot because I wanted to get bird breath. I wanted to get birds in fog with the light behind, and it took. Um, it has to be certain conditions to get their breath. It needs to be a calm day. It needs to be cold. Um, you need to have, at least full sun, and you need something dark behind them so the breath really shows up. And the cranes, I noticed, will get really talkative right before they fly. They do their fly out in the morning. And so as soon as they would get really talkative, I would start focusing, trying to find a crane. The hardest part was just isolating because you have, so many moving parts. You have 1,000 cranes moving, all over, and they've got their flight pattern, but I don't know exactly what that is. And so I'm just, watching, waiting, and so, but I was able to get this image. But to me, it was like this crane was breathing fire, and
And that's what it
creatively,
looks like.
yeah.
It's not a dragon, but
No,
it's beautiful, and the light that comes around its neck, highlights its forehead, um, is all just part of the magic. So,
with
it,
birds, you can get the rim lighting, back.
Mhm.
It's really good with their with birds with feathers, and so that's just, one way of being, creative, or intentional camera movements is another way, slow the shutter way down, and
Mhm.
lock on to their eyes. And it may take you 1,000 pictures to get one that you just absolutely love, but it's so fun to do.
I have a request. Can we just let Pam take over the webinar from here on out and I can just watch? Can we do
Oh,
that?
no, no, no.
We've got a couple more questions for you. Don't worry. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the other part of this picture that I love is it's not all those things that you mentioned, but it's sunrise, or I guess it's sunrise. So that golden color
Hmm.
is, I am going to go out of the box here and ask, did you increase saturation at all?
I don't think I did. I can't remember. It's been a couple years since I took this,
Hmm.
but it was just the light behind it and having something dark behind the crane.
Yeah.
So that really intensifies the light.
Tell me a little bit before I go from this picture on to the next one. Tell me a little bit about your settings. Do you change the compensation, or how do you move your settings for this shot?
Well, I don't know about this one, but like to get rim lighting, you take your exposure compensation down, and then just play with it depending on the everything around you. I probably had my my shutter still high, just in case the
Mhm.
bird flew. And I imagine I was wide open. But
Yeah.
playing around with exposure compensation is fun, and it's another way to be creative.
Right.
We do have a quick question in the comments.
Sure.
Pam, David is curious to know what level of editing goes into this amazing professional photo.
Well, I kind of can carry on into the next one. I like my edges clean. And
Mhm.
so if there's something distracting in an image that, if you take the next one, this is a vermilion flycatcher at Bosque del Apache. And I've got some good images of these, but I took this last week and I was thinking it might be a good example to where if you look at this is the original. If you look at it, it's very distracting. And this is what I came away with. And so what I would have liked is to have been able to get the little bird within the V. And so it's not so much editing, but I would have had to be in the water to do that. There was no way, and the bird would have flown. And so, by just taking out some of those distracting branches, it just gives a cleaner version of the bird. And I'm not a historian. I'm not a journalist. I'm a fine art photographer, and so you know, my images, that part of the processing for me is the creative aspect of it. And so I just want the focus to be on, the wildlife or or bird life that I'm shooting. And so I will take out distracting elements. And so think about that when you're shooting, do you have this beautiful image of a bird and then you have a blade of grass in the corner that might distract you? And so,
We call them safari grasses, right? There's always one right up through the
right.
face of an animal, but here it's a perfect example, Pam, of, a conundrum you're in and you can't
Hmm.
easily get out of it, but you made the most of it. And it's a great example. Do you use what tool did you use to remove the stick in post?
Photoshop. And
Okay.
I actually took one of the erase tools in Photoshop, and it's really pretty easy to do. And
Hmm.
I took a couple pictures, different views, and I think I laid one over the other. Just right as it gets near the eye um, was a little tricky, but other than that,
Mm.
it was pretty easy to remove.
Okay. That's a good point, that you had multiple pictures of
Hmm.
this setting with the stick in a different place, maybe. And so
Right.
you could use part of one to put into the other. Um, anyways, great technique. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Um, so tell us about any really memorable situations in these places you've been, um, where you thought it just you thought it would be unbelievably magical, and things that maybe it wasn't a great shot, but it was something that you remember really well about
Um,
a photo shoot.
well, this particular one, we were in Lake Clark, Alaska, and it rained. We were camping on the beach, and it rained every single day we were there. And I had, thankfully, I had two cameras with me, which I will say always bring two camera bodies with you when you're traveling because you just don't know. And I had, at the time, it was a 7D2 and a 5D4. And I liked my 7D2 better for wildlife. I just brought my 5D4, for landscape. And the 7D2, after a couple days in the rain, even though I protected, tried to protect it, it quit working. And so,
Did
but
you
thankfully,
just say a Canon quit working? Is that what you said?
That's
no,
enough
I
out
didn't
of
say
you.
that. It was me. It wasn't them. And so, um, thankfully I had a backup and, one morning we were, watching this meadow full of bears, and there was a mama bear with two babies, and, a big male boar came into the meadow. And what I didn't know then, what surprised me, but is true, is a mother bear will come near people to get away from male bears. And so this mother bear brought her 2 young ones up near us and was in the grass right beside us. And we didn't want to move off because we didn't want to block her path in case she wanted to go out behind the grass into the beach. And so we weren't quite sure where they were. And then I looked over, and this little bear, this brave little bear cub, looks up, and he's looking out into the meadow to see if that male boar was still there. And so I love this image. I titled it Braveheart because I thought it was so brave of him just to, stand up all alone and see if the threat was gone. And the male boar did leave, and they went back in the meadow, and they were feasting on the sedge grass there. But that was an incredible moment.
Do you recall what lens you used to photograph that bear?
That was a 500 millimeter.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Tell us about this shot.
Well, this was on a Muench workshop, and I think we left out of Sitka. Marc, you were my guide for this actually, and so this was an incredible trip. We were going to see the bubble net feeding whales, and this this particular whale breached right by our boat. We saw so many incredible things, but yeah, this was a fun moment. I was supposed to be sitting down eating lunch at this point, but I had a feeling something was going to happen, and it did. And so
I think that was about the time I realized something about you.
and this one, this was, if I had to pick an experience of everything I've ever done, and pick my favorite moment, it would absolutely 100% be on this trip. And we'd been seeing whales the whole week. We saw sea lions, eagles, we saw so much, but we also got to see the northern lights. And one night we were up shooting them, and the skies kind of exploded, and but then it kind of started to dissipate, and everybody else went to bed. But a couple nights earlier we had gotten the northern lights, and I went to bed, and one of the crew got some a couple hours later. And so I had FOMO big time, and I was so afraid that if I went to bed I was going to miss something. And so I was up on the top of this yacht in Alaska by myself, and I was looking out, just waiting for the northern lights, and I hear a whale spout. And we had a whale kind of all around us, and I think somebody, it might have been Marcella, I don't know if she's here, but I think she affectionately named him Bob. And so
Remember Bob?
and so, Bob spouted by the boat, and I started thinking, I wonder if I can get Bob with the northern lights, and I wonder if I could get him breaching with the northern lights. And so, I was started to watch him, and then I remembered that I read, whales can hear music out of the water. And so I turned on some music I had. If you've ever heard the song Honor Him from Gladiator, it's a beautiful song. It's like a hauntingly beautiful song. And so I was listening to this music, and I was watching, Bob spout in this little bay, and watching the northern lights. And all of a sudden he breached, and I clicked the shutter, and unfortunately all I got was the splash, and just his tail going in the water. And so I thought, one thing we did notice on that trip is they would breach a lot of times in pairs. And so I thought, I wonder if he's going to do it again. So I was playing with my settings, and I was getting ready, and then all of a sudden he did it again. And I clicked on the shutter, and I got the message card full. and my heart sank. But I stopped and I just watched. And I think as photographers, we don't always just sit back and embrace the moment. And I absolutely just, embrace the moment. And I would do this, 100 times over, even if I got the same result, especially now, in solar maximum. This is the time to be in Alaska. This is, going to be one of the, the best times to get the northern lights. For I think it's like every 11 years or so that it cycles through. And so we're at one of the strongest peak times for the aurora.
Well, I know you say you had a moment listening to the music and watching the whale jump, but when I came downstairs the next morning and you explained to me what happened, I thought it was April 1st then. I thought you
No,
were messing with me, and sure enough, it was true. You had encountered this or had this experience. So that goes down as one of my favorite stories of something that happened on a workshop. So thank you,
wow.
Pam.
We do have a
for
couple
doing that.
people asking which workshop this was. Was this the Alaskan story?
That's perfect timing. So again, Richard, I was going to ask you to tell us a little bit about the Alaskan story because that was the ship and the
Yes.
situation that we were in on that boat in Alaska.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you see here in this photo is what Pam has already alluded to about the bubble net feeding. So the whales, they've got a group of like bait fish, like herring or something like that. And what they do is they kind of surround it and they start blowing bubbles. And that creates like a barrier that the fish can't get out of. It's like a trap. And once they do that, then they come up from the below and they come right through them with their mouths agape and they just fill up with the fish. And that's what you see here. You see their mouths open and they're just full of fish. And so I just recently learned, and this is a guest on my podcast, Brian Scary, who did Disney's Secret of the Whales, that a single whale could do the same thing that a group can. Looks like there's about 8 or 10 of them here, but this is more of a social activity. It's kind of like a Friday night poker game where it's really not much of it has less to do with the poker and the chips and the snacks than it does just a group of people coming together. Whereas you can play video poker by yourself, but it's about the camaraderie. And that's actually what the researchers found out, that this is just a social event. The feeding is actually secondary. It's them just getting together and having some fun as a group. But yeah, this is called bubble netting. And on the Alaska story, which we leave out of Juneau instead of Sitka. Well, we see this all the time. I've done the Alaska story trip at least 4 times, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and we see bubble netting at least once or maybe twice, 2 or 3 times per trip. And that's always exciting because it happens over and over again. You can almost time it, that they'll all come up together and then they'll splash around a little bit and they'll swallow other fish. Then they all go down. They see their flukes. They dive down, and you can almost count the seconds before they come back up and do it again. Just really amazing sight. And this is the Alaska story. I could tell by the bow of the ship here, the yacht that we use, and you can see how close we are to these whales in front of us. And they're just fluking here. They're not doing the bubble net feeding. But the Alaska story, we leave out of Juneau, and we go through the icy strait and a lot of the waterways, and we do some fishing. You see the guy in the middle, we're doing fishing, and the boat is just fantastic, great food. But what you see, we go into Glacier Bay. We have permits to go into Glacier Bay. We actually spend 2 or 3 nights in the park on the ship. So in addition to whales, there's tons and tons of whales. We see sea otters, we see bald eagles, we see puffins, we see sea lions, mountain goats on Gloomy Knob. We see bears. My first trip to Glacier Bay, I saw a bear and a wolf on a sandbar together, on the same sandbar. It's a fantastic experience. We're not focused on like any one species, although probably we see more whales than anything else, but it's just the landscape, the glaciers. I mean, it's really got everything. It's a true, Alaska wilderness experience. And boat is just fantastic. The food is fantastic. It's locally caught. Like I said, we do a little fishing. We troll through here. We get some salmon. We cook it. We eat it that night. We do crab pots. Eat fresh crab one night. Just an incredible experience. Photography is just, off the charts.
I remember, and maybe you do too, Pam, but right before the whales come up as they're bubble net feeding, you can hear this song, and it's actually quite loud, and it's not creepy, but it's enchanting. And then all of a sudden you're looking left and right trying to figure out exactly where they're going to come up, and then poof, they come up in the water somewhere. And that sound, I guess, is them singing and scaring the fish, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of, the vibration of the sound underwater is startling all these little fish. So it's part of the technique, from what I understand.
It's incredible to see.
So, Pam, you've mentioned your love of the bears. What is it about photographing them that keeps you going back? And forever and ever, probably, knowing you.
Yes, forever and ever. They're just so expressive, and it's just always changing, always something different. We drove to Denver this weekend, and we were listening to this history podcast. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Wojtek, but he was a Serbian bear that was he was sold to the Polish army, and he was actually enlisted as a private and then became a corporal. It's a fascinating story. If you ever, you want to look and read about some bear history. He became, this was during World War II. He became quite the hero. And this podcast is Wojtek. It's like the bear who I think it's like destroyed the Nazis or something. But
Mhm.
it's fascinating. They're so intelligent. And so I think it's just, being so close to such a beautiful, intelligent animal. Um, it's invigorating. And especially being in the water with them, like an image like this, where they're looking right at you. Um, it's an adrenaline rush. And so, yeah, I just, I love seeing them.
Richard, you've been to Alaska and Canada photographing these bears. As you mentioned, I don't know how many times, over 20 times. What have you learned over the years from photographing them?
I think I've learned that I was probably a bear in a former life.
Hmm.
Or maybe my next life I'm a bear. No, I really do kind of like what Pam said. I really relate to these animals, and that goes for a lot of the megafauna. That they're very expressive. Their eyes are expressive. The ears. You can anthropomorphize, even if it looks like a bear is happy. We don't know if it's really happy or not, but we can use that and inject our image with that emotion so that other people kind of feel that, even if they're not quite happy. But we can still take that from them. But they have almost like individual bears. After you spend enough time with them, you find out individual bears have different personality than other bears, and the expression, the almost human-like quality they have, their curiosity, their intelligence. I can't get enough of them. They're one of my favorite animals to photograph. This is one that's clamming. This isn't like Clark. They dig up clams in the flats at low tide. It kind of looks like he's doing a downward dog there, yoga position, maybe
Go pose.
yoga pose. But that weather you see there is kind of typical of Southwest Alaska. It's a kind of misty, not really heavy rain, but kind of misty with that foggy, very ethereal looking. But look at the look on his face. It's almost like I caught him in the act of. They just have they're very expressive. That you don't get that with like a photograph of a ladybug, or a sparrow or a iguana. They just don't have those expressive qualities that bears and big cats do. That's why I kind of gravitate to them.
So I know it's so intriguing to photograph bears in different places, but oftentimes in settings there is no fence between you, the photographer, and the wildlife, and in this case, the bears. Tell us a little bit about that and how you fit into feeling comfortable or maybe even confident in those situations.
Yeah, so this looks like Geographic Harbor just by the terrain and the little braided channels of the river. So you're going to be with them. I mean, they're going to be sometimes as close as, looks like this could be 20, 25 feet away, but they have really no interest in photographers or humans at all. As long as you act responsibly, no sudden movements, you don't go running toward them or anything like that. But you see this bear, and it's close to our group of photographers, but it's looking down. It's looking down into the water. They're hunting salmon. They're focused on getting as fat as possible before they have to go hibernate later in the fall. But we instruct everybody to stay together as a group. We don't spread out. We stay together as a group, and we don't want the bear to feel threatened, like if we're trying to surround them. Or we just stay together as a group. We listen to the guide. If the bear comes close to us, the guide will say, just sit still, and it'll just pass on by. Sometimes as close as 10 or 12 feet, and they may give you a look. They may look you in the eye. It's not like they don't know you're there. They just don't find this very interesting. They have other things that are more important. But no sudden movements. Just let's let them come to you, and it's just to be in their presence that close to them is a thrill. I would do that trip, this Katmai that you see right here, even if I didn't own a camera. Just the experience of being that close, amongst 12, 16, 18 bears all around in different in every direction. But this trip here, this is in Katmai. This is what we do is we meet in Kodiak Island, and we do dinner, and then the following day we fly out a float plane. We land on the water, and that boat you see on the left is the Dreamcatcher, and that's our home for the next 7 or 8 days. And we sleep there, we eat there, we get together and do our image critiques there, and then we go out on Zodiac boats, the little rafts, and we go to shore. We take our camera gear. We take a little 5-gallon bucket that we use as a seat. So you carry that 5-gallon bucket, and when we get to the sandbar that we're going to shoot from, you turn the bucket over, you sit on it, and you're surrounded by bears. And you just pick our spots. The guide will sometimes move us from one place to the other. It looks like there's more action going, one area. But like I said, I would just, my love of bears and my love of these animals, and you will fall in love with them, because they're very personable, they're very expressive. And even after, 8 days there, you'll start to know them personally, individual bears. And just to watch them interact. Pam mentioned earlier about the females and how they have to be on the watch out for the males, because they'll kill the cubs so they can mate with females. So you see the female, there's all these big bears, boars everywhere. And the female's coming up with 2 or 3 cubs, and she's got to catch fish, not only for herself, but for the cubs, and keep an eye out for the male bears. So you really have appreciation for how tough a job she has. So just watching all this drama unfold, and you're making images, but sometimes you just put the camera down and you just watch them. They're just amazing to watch.
And most of the time they're eating salmon, and they're
that's all
just
they're
munching
doing.
out,
They're just munching out.
accumulating protein as much as they can for the winter. And that's what they're doing, right? As far as I know.
If they're not eating salmon, they're looking for salmon, or they're chasing salmon. That's their single focus. We're part of the scenery as far as they're concerned.
Cool. Well, you guys, thanks for joining us. Any other questions we need to get at, Jess, by any chance? I don't want to leave
We
anybody
do
behind.
actually have a few. The photograph that Pam had taken of the bear, not the one wrapped around the tree, but the one that looked like me on a really bad day. Um, someone was wondering what your f-stop was on that.
I don't remember offhand, but I'm sure I was wide open.
Okay.
That one.
That's interesting. It wasn't the dark one in the low light. Is that the one maybe?
The black and white one. Oh,
Okay.
Well, they both, I guess, looked black and white. Yeah. And then there was one more question. What do you do to stabilize your image when you are on the boats,
Is
given
this,
the long focal length of your
are
lens?
you like on the Alaska story?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, first of all, it's relatively calm. So we're in the waterways in um, between the mountains and everything. So it's not like, the Drake Passage, but using a long lens when you're hand holding it and you're on the boats, you just want to be sure that you have a fast enough shutter speed. Use what the camera lens gives you as far as stabilization, but you want to use a fast enough shutter speed. Usually, depending on what we're shooting, a thousandth of a second or 1600th of a second. But that's really all. You don't want to try to stabilize it by putting a tripod on the boat. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And you don't want to stabilize it by trying to like brace yourself against the rail. You're better off just holding it, using good holding techniques with your arms tucked into your body and your head kind of pressed up against the viewfinder, and then cradling the lens in your left hand, and then using the stabilizer on the lens. And if you have it in the body, use it on the body, and then using a fast enough shutter speed. That's really all you have.
Thank you. That's helpful. Sorry.
I will add, I did use a tripod on for the Northern Lights on the boat, and it did work pretty well.
I remember we were messing around with that. We got it down to 1 or 2 seconds
Mm-hmm.
with the tripod, and that's how still the waters were.
Right.
We were fortunate,
Very calm.
but sometimes if it's a little motion, you wouldn't be able to get away with a full second, but at least you could probably get by with a half a second or a 30th of a second, even depending on where you are. But well, great. Well, thank you guys both for sharing all these stories and your wisdom of working with animals. I will ask one last time, Jess, is there any other questions we wanted to get to?
We actually have a lot of questions, a lot of people wanting to know why people should travel with Muench or showing interest in a different workshop. I will say if you go to muenchworkshops.com, you will be able to find our email address, which is info@muenchworkshops.com, and then also our phone number. Feel free to send an email if you want to even reply to the email that you received about the webinar. I'll be able to answer that for you. We'll help you get set up, answer any questions you have, and we'll definitely be sending out a link to the recording here very soon. Tomorrow, very soon.
Excellent. And I'll say briefly that if you haven't been with us before, we do a couple things. We create a pre-workshop Zoom meeting where everybody gets to ask the instructors any questions they have about the equipment they're going to need or use, ask what kind of techniques maybe they need to study up on. In the case where you're going on a boat, there might be specific questions if you want to use a monopod, anything like that. All those topics are covered before the trip starts. We do cover the lodging, the food, and everything on the trip is inclusive. And so when you show up to do one of these trips on the Alaskan Story ship, everything's covered. We cover the tips, especially, and the crews we work with are amazing, and we tip them well. It's part of what we feel good and proud about is keeping all the people we work with happy, and so that they're looking forward to us coming back. And we do have a good. I'll say there's no other better word for it than family of photographers because they're very focused on what they do, and you can hear stories from Pam and Richard that this is not just a normal hobby. It's something that people grow a passion for. And so we love that, and we love sharing those moments with people. So we hope that if you haven't joined us, you'd feel inspired to do so. And again, if anybody has any particular questions to either of them, Richard or Pam, feel free, send us an email at info@, and we'll have them see the question and get back to you when they can. So without any more delay, I'd like to say thank you again, Richard, and thank you, Pam. It was
Thank you,
wonderful to
everybody.
have you.
Thank you for showing
Thanks,
up,
Mark.
everyone.
And thank you,
for having
Jess.
us.
Of course. Have a good night, guys.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.